Good afternoon, everyone. This is Laurel Birchfield with the Michigan Coalition Against Homelessness. I am very glad that you're able to join us today for our rescheduled webinar for our Election 2020 series. We'll be talking today about challenges and opportunities for some of our disenfranchised voters as we try to empower individuals to participate in our electoral process, not only this election, but for future elections as well. So thank you again for joining us and for your interest in this topic. I want to go over a couple housekeeping items, and then I am going to go over a couple bits of information, and then I'm going to turn it over to some of our panelists. So housekeeping first, we do use GoToWebinar. For those of you who have used it before, this is going to be a bit of a rehash, but for those of you who have not used it before, you are currently muted. You're set up so that you can raise your hand or use the chat box or the question box if you would like to speak with us at any time. We encourage questions throughout our presentation. We will answer them at the very end. Perhaps I'll take a look if questions come in after each of our panelists. We may pause and answer questions for each of our panelists as we go through. But please feel free to send in questions using the questions or chat box at any time during our presentation. If you have something that you would like to discuss, and you are in a place without a lot of background noise, raise your hand or let me know via the chat box, and we can try to unmute you so you can talk with our panelists as well. This is going to be recorded. Our hope is that we can put this out in a follow-up email and on our social media so that all of you can share this with your network, with anyone who is interested in this topic but is unable to be here currently for our live presentation. So please help us spread the word about this. After we are done with today's presentation, with the recording, send it out to your networks and let them know that this is a resource that is available for anyone who's interested in voter registration and education. If you go to your dashboard on GoToWebinar, you'll see that there is a handouts dropdown. I have uploaded 3 different documents that you guys can download, and I will be sending these out in a follow-up email as well. But we have our 2 presentations as PDFs, and then I also have a frequently asked questions document that Micah has put together specifically for individuals who are experiencing homelessness, who are looking for information about voter registration and education for this election. I believe that is all the housekeeping that I have. So I will go ahead and get started with our content. As I said, I'm joined by 2 fantastic panelists today, Dwayne Cole with the Ruth Ellis Center in Detroit and Noah Walker with Disability Rights Michigan. So I am very excited to be able to turn it over to them shortly so that they can talk about voter education and registration specific for the populations they work with. But first, I want to share with you some broader information about voter registration and education. First of all, this webinar is part of a series, Election 2020. This one's specifically about meeting the challenges of voter registration for disenfranchised populations. We are funded through 2 different organizations, the Our Homes, Our Votes 2020 campaign, which is a part of the National Low Income Housing Coalition, and ACLU Michigan, their election protection program, which has allowed us to increase capacity across the state for our homeless service providers working to register and educate individuals experiencing homelessness and housing insecurity. So we want to say thank you to both of our sponsors who are allowing us to do some very important election work this year. So I'm assuming based on who we communicate with through our social media and through our communications that a lot of you are with homeless service providers or otherwise involved with housing in your community and interact with folks, or may yourself be someone who has experienced homelessness either currently or in the past. So I think it's important for us to just kind of pause before we talk about voter registration and education and talk about why you should get involved in this work and why election work is so important for the people we serve and also the broader population. So we at MICA feel that voting is a right and everyone should feel as if their vote counts. And that process begins with you as someone who is on the front lines of a service provider or in your community or talking with your peers. This process begins with you and your ability to encourage and empower others to participate in our elections. We also think that voting is a racial justice issue and that registering and educating people experiencing homelessness about voting and the voting process is a way to reduce racial disparity. This year, we have several new opportunities in Michigan that we hope people are learning about and participating in. And those opportunities were passed by our election in 2018 and will now allow automatic voter registration So when you go and get your state ID or your driver's license, you are automatically registered to vote now. Absentee ballots for no reason. Previously, you had to have a reason to request an absentee ballot. This year is the first year, the first election year that you can request an absentee ballot or a mail-in ballot without needing a reason to do so. So everybody who is registered to vote can request that absentee ballot right now. And we also have same-day registration, which means that if for some reason you or the people you're working with are unable to register to vote in advance, you can go to your local clerk's office on election day and actually register and cast your ballot all on November 3rd. So these are really fantastic new opportunities and paths for participation that we hope all of you are going to partake in this year. And finally, why we should get involved in this work is because candidates listen to their constituents. So we as a statewide organization work with our congressional and state candidates every election cycle. But ultimately, when we speak with them, it all comes down to them wanting to know what is happening in their district with the people who they are serving directly. And so that's why we need you to engage now so that after the election, we actually have elected officials who know about housing and homelessness issues, who prioritize those solutions, and have relationships with you so that as we move forward, they know who to talk to about these issues and how to resolve them in their communities. Mike has made available a couple of resources that we want to share with you. These are posters that we've developed. I apologize, these are earlier drafts, so our final versions have a couple tweaks to them. But these are available with the link that is on the screen. If you download the PDF of this presentation, it should be an embedded link, so you can click right on it. And you can go and request as many of these posters as you'd like. We have them printed and waiting in our office, waiting to go out the door and into your mailbox. So please take advantage of these materials if you are in a location where you have space to post things. They're great conversation starters and reminders for folks about deadlines and about why we should be registering and casting our ballot this year. Let's talk about some specific challenges for individuals experiencing homelessness or housing insecurity with voter registration. And first, let's talk about addresses. This is a very unique challenge for the population experiencing homelessness or housing insecurity because voter registration requires an address. And so this has often been a hurdle for folks who are trying to register and trying to participate in the electoral process. Fortunately, Michigan actually allows you to register to vote without a permanent residential address. You can list a shelter, a park, an advocacy or an outreach organization. So if you work in a shelter, you can have your guests use your location and your address on their registration application. Or you can even list any place where someone usually stays. That can be the intersection of two cross streets. So there's really no reason why someone who does not have a permanent residential address can't register to vote. All of these different ways to have an address listed on the application are on the Secretary of State's website, the State Department's website, as acceptable ways to list your address. Before I move on, I should acknowledge that all of the information that I'm going to be sharing over the next couple of slides are included in that frequently asked question document that you can download on the dashboard on GoToWebinar, and I will be sending it out after the presentation. This is a document that we hope can be used in your shelters and your locations, can help you as you try to navigate some of these challenges and opportunities, and can be posted even in your location so folks have access to this information. It has all been vetted and approved by the Secretary of State's office, and we're currently getting it translated into Spanish. We should have that within another day or two. So all of these are resources that we're trying to make available to make it just a little bit easier for folks as they participate in this process. So let's get back to addresses and the challenges for individuals experiencing homelessness or housing insecurity. One hiccup to using some of these addresses is that if you register to vote within 14 days of the election, so that's coming up very soon after October 19th, I believe, you have to do so in person at your local clerk's office. And at this time, you do have to bring a proof of residency. Now, this can be a letter from a church, a shelter, a public assistance agency, but it has to list your name and it has to have an address. So that is one additional barrier, one extra thing for us to know about. If you go into some of the latter weeks of the election cycle and you want to register in person, you do need to bring that proof of residency with you. IDs are another barrier that our folks often experience, and this is something that has a lot of misinformation that is floating out there around whether or not you need an ID to register to vote or to participate in casting your ballot each year. You do not need that. Even if someone is putting that information out that you have to have an ID, that you have to show an ID when you go to vote on election day, you do not need that physical document with you in order to participate. And we really need to make sure that our folks who are seeking services or seeking shelter with our agencies are aware of that, because that too often is a barrier that folks feel holds them back from participating. Because as I said, we know that that is a challenge for some of the folks that we serve, is that they don't have an ID. Now, as with all things that are government and bureaucratic, there are some barriers still. So if you register online, and I did include the website michigan.gov/vote, you do have to have your driver's license or an ID number and your social security number. So if you're doing it online, you do need that information. But if you're registering by mail or in person, you don't have to have an ID. You may be able to submit a copy of a paycheck stub, utility bill, bank statement, or a government document that lists your name and address, or you can sign an affidavit. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you are now automatically registered to vote when you get an ID. They have it set up so you can opt out, but you are automatically opted into becoming a registered voter when you get your ID now. So that's something, as you are working with your clients and your guests, and you are helping them get into the Secretary of State's offices to get their IDs, let them know that they are now a registered voter. And finally, once you are registered to vote, when you go in to cast your ballot on election day, or if you vote early, you do not have to have your ID with you. You are able to sign an affidavit in order to still vote, and that ballot will be counted as normal. I have up on the screen just a visual for you so you can see what the online registration form looks like. And I have the information about IDs and addresses with online registration here. And this is what the document looks like if you were doing a mail-in application. So here you must have, in terms of your ID, a copy of a paycheck stub, utility bill, bank statement, or that government document. But same rules apply for address. You can still list the street corner, shelter, park, agency, anyone who's willing to be listed as a residential address or a mailing address as well. I apologize, I have some background noise because I'm being visited by my cat. So I do apologize for any background noise. All right, so let's talk about early voting, because as I said, this is a new opportunity for us this year, is to be able to register to vote up until election day. And we're also able to cast our ballots early. And there's two ways to do that. One is through an absentee ballot by mail, and you can request your absentee ballot by mail or online if you do so before October 30th. Here, if you're requesting it by mail, we do encourage you to use a mailing address for an organization, family member, or person who's willing to accept mail on your behalf, because that's how an individual receives their absentee ballot. If you're unable to mail back your absentee ballot, you can still turn it in. There are drop boxes all over the state. You have to do it at your designated drop box. And I do have information here about how to go to michigan.gov/vote and choose who is your clerk to find the location of your drop box. Or you can also drop it off physically, or a family member can drop that off for you. The catch here, and the reason why it's important for us as homeless service providers to pay attention to this, is because we as service providers and staff are not able to drop off the absentee ballot on behalf of someone who we are serving. So it does have to be dropped off by an individual or a close family member. You can, as at this time, provide transportation so that you can take someone to the drop-off box and they can drop it off, and you can be the one to drive them there, but you cannot be the one to physically drop it off in the box for them. If you do not want to do the request for a mailed absentee ballot, you can still vote early, and this started on September 24th, so 40 days before the election. You go to your local clerk's office, you ask to fill out an absentee ballot, and you turn it in. Of course, voting on election day is still available in every jurisdiction. This is a very challenging year because of COVID and how that's impacting all of our concerns with public health and safety. But the Secretary of State is putting out information every day about how they are taking extra precautions to make sure that they are following social distance safety protocols and doing other things to make sure that your health is protected and that it is safe to vote in person on election day. So voter education. I just want to talk briefly about some of the challenges we hear as we're talking to service providers around the state about trying to empower individuals who are experiencing homelessness or housing insecurity to vote. So historically, individuals experiencing homelessness or low-income voters do have a lower turnout rate with voting, and they may feel that their vote doesn't count. So it's up to us, as I said very early in this conversation, to do what we can to empower those voters and to assure them that their vote is just as important as anyone else in this country. Everybody has one vote to cast, and their vote is counted just like anyone else's. We know that individuals who are experiencing homelessness or housing insecurity may not prioritize voter registration and voting right now. And they may not even be open to talking about the election while seeking assistance, especially during COVID-19. And this is a challenge that we all face in our work every day, is how do we make sure that we are serving the individual and the needs that they have immediately. And now we have to add the additional challenge of thinking about how we can educate them about the election. And while I recognize that that is a difficult challenge, I encourage everyone to think through how you can do that and how you can be successful with that, not just over the next 30 some days, but year round, even in non-election years, because empowering our individuals, our peers, our neighbors to think about elections and the impact of their vote, I think is something that we should all be doing all the time. Now, individuals may also need additional support, such as transportation to the polls or a stamp for a mail-in ballot. These are all things that we as service providers can provide. And our folks may also be told that they cannot vote, whether because they don't have an ID or an address or other suppression tactics that may be happening throughout the state. But they absolutely are able to cast their vote and able to register. If they encounter suppression tactics or if they encounter anyone telling them they can't vote, I have the phone numbers for the Department of State and the ACLU, and I encourage you to give them a call. In order to meet that challenge for encouraging and empowering individuals to register and cast their votes, MICA has built up a voter registration education peer ambassador video program. We just launched this last week, and so I'm very excited to let you guys know about it and encourage you all to participate and to share it within your networks and with any guests or clients who you're currently serving. This is an opportunity for people who have survived homelessness and have walked through this journey to share their own voices and stories about why they're voting this year and why they think others should be voting this year. We're asking folks to record themselves using just a cell phone or any other technology that they have at their disposal. Just a short 30-second video talking about their experience. We'll be issuing specific questions for them to answer. And then they give it to us. We have the ability to edit and clean the videos, post them on our social media, and to spread them out there for folks to be talking about. We are able to provide a very small, modest stipend, so $25 Visa gift card per video that is accepted. And I know that's not a lot, but we're hopeful that it's at least something to compensate and acknowledge the way that we value and support the folks who would be submitting their videos. The link on the screen takes you to some documents, and I also will make sure that that gets out in our follow-up email. And that's it for my presentation. I have not seen any questions come in, but I'm just going to check and make sure I haven't missed anything. And fortunately, I haven't had anyone say that they're having issues with the screen or the sound, even with my cat knocking stuff on the ground during this presentation. So thank you. I hope you're all able to hear me okay. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to some of our panelists. As I said early on, please feel free to send in questions at any time. We're very happy to answer those as we go through or to do them at the very end. But I'm going to go ahead and turn to some of our other experts. Unfortunately, Troy with Safe and Just Michigan and Nation Outside was not able to join us. He had something come up at the last minute, and so he will not be able to present, but I'm going to be following up with him. He works with formerly incarcerated individuals and is very active in making sure that those folks are educated and empowered to register to vote and cast their ballot this year. So I'm going to follow up and see if he has any information that he would like me to send out in the follow-up email, and hopefully we can get that information to you. I'm going to turn now to Noah, who is with Disability Rights Michigan, and he is going to speak with us about some of the challenges and opportunities in his world with the people that he works with on a regular basis. So Noah, I believe I can make you a presenter and you can share your screen with us.
Yeah, so my name is Noah Walker from Disability Rights Michigan, and we are the state's protection and advocacy for people with disabilities. So we are basically the statewide chapter, for advocacy, and we are funded by 9 federally mandated programs, and one of those programs is about voting. So under the 1964 Westbury v. Sanders, no right is more precious in a free country than that of having a voice in the election of those who make the laws under which, as good citizens, we must live. And this was sort of like the pretext for the Voting Rights Act for people within all the civil rights groups that were out there during the 60s. And now some of that is kind of like a little bit in danger at this point. Next slide. The Americans with Disabilities Act requires state and local governments to ensure that people with disabilities have a full and equal opportunity to vote. And this is under like an October 2014 ruling. And most of this was supported by the Help America Vote Act of 2002, so that people with disabilities had more access to the vote than ever before. The ADA provisions apply to all aspects of voting, including registration, so being able to register, site selection, and the casting of ballots, whether on election day or during, under these times, an early voting process, whether it's voting by absentee or doing it in person. Now I'm going to show you some very similar barriers to voting and like similar voting from people with disabilities and people who are homeless, and both of them are kind of like intersecting. So the 2017 study found that nearly 30 million potential voters have disabilities, but vote less often by 6% and then register 2% less often. These percentages have not really changed significantly since 2008. And the thing is that if people with disabilities vote at the same rate as people without disabilities, there would be 2.2 million additional voters. And right now, they are considered to be consisting of like 1/5 of potential voters. So this is going to be really critical for a lot of people to register, people with disabilities to vote, get out there, whether by absentee, early voting, or in person. The Rutgers update found that the turnout rates varied by disability, and that turnout by employed adults with disabilities was equal to that of adults without disabilities. That means that if people with disabilities were fully employed, they had a livable wage, and they were able to really support themselves by being in a community setting instead of being institutionalized and not really having any kind of pay and subject to abuse, then then they would actually be able to vote just the same rate as adults without disabilities. So that means that the more employment opportunities you get, you're going to have an equal chance of voting, more likely. And then a 2014 survey found that one of the greatest barriers reported by voters to a good voting experience was their own lack of education on candidates and issues. This is 25% of the people that were surveyed. And this is not just true for people with disabilities, but also people without disabilities that are marginalized, such as people who are homeless, people who are of some kind of like racial group that is somehow considered to be marginalized, for lack of a better word. So, and it can also include LGBTQ folks. It could include any kind of person that is marginalized, disenfranchised for whatever reason. If they don't know what the candidates are nor the issues, then they're less likely going to vote and less likely to think that it's going to count. So by far, one of the biggest barriers to voting is accessibility. Sadly, only 40% of sampled polling places are considered accessible. And we got to change that to make sure that it is fully accessible to people with disabilities of any kind. Barriers include steep ramps that are above 8.3% gradient, that's under ADA, lack of signage to the polling place, lack of parking, and the biggest one is not just the improper placement of accessible voting stations, it's also that the machines are not turned on. And I've seen way too many cases where people with disabilities were not able to vote because of the fact that their voting station was not turned on, and we had to file complaints on behalf of them. And early voting systems are not always guaranteed to be accessible, even though the use by people with disabilities are increasing. So that's something to really keep in mind for being able to cast your vote. So barriers to voting for people with disabilities include filling out an absentee ballot. This is especially true for people who were low vision or blind. And there was a lawsuit that occurred on behalf of the Nyman law firm on behalf of blind people. And the Secretary of State decided to settle the whole issue by putting an electronic ballot delivery system for this year's election. So that's being taken care of, but sometimes it can be an issue because one of the big hiccups is that you're going to have to have matching signatures, which can be a big issue. Getting transportation to the polls has always traditionally been an issue for people with disabilities when voting in person, because you got to really arrange it and it's got to take you to the right place, and not everyone has access to it. And casting a private ballot can be an issue. That's the ultimate goal that we all have, is to cast a private ballot successfully and then just get an I voted sticker. Sometimes, because the voting machine's not really working properly, sometimes when you try to cast a private ballot, it automatically doesn't work. So that way, like, your vote doesn't really get a count. It's actually rejected, and then you're going to have to go for some kind of provisional ballot as like a last measure. Using accessible voting equipment, again, as I said, if the machine is not turned on, it's not accessible. And that's really kind of like more of like a poll worker training issue. And and it's also got to be placed properly in the right spot. So that way, people with disabilities have privacy, just the same way as a person without a disability who's using a traditional printed ballot. And then navigating poles and wheelchairs can be a problem, especially if you're in an older building that was not really meant to be accessible, where there's like multiple steps. That can be a real issue right there. And getting fair treatment by poll workers is really just like more of a poll worker training issue. And right now there has been some calls for more disability competency from poll workers. Under the 2018 SAFE report, most of the barriers to voting were physical ones. And that includes having trouble with the doors. So for doors, it's got to be at least 32 inches or wider. Although I have heard from some people who have really big, like power wheelchairs, that they're unable to fit between the doors. So that's something good to keep in mind for myself. 10% have problems with voting machines not working properly. Again, if it's turned off and it can't really turn on, and if it's having some kind of malfunction, that's going to be an issue. And 10% said that the voting booth was not having any kind of privacy, or nor the same kind of privacy that somebody with a traditional ballot had. And that was really the issue that that both myself and the rest of the people that were working in the agency that I work for saw during 2018, was that there was not any kind of privacy. And then while 61% of voters surveyed under the SAFE report voted independently, only 46% of newer voters were able to vote independently. So if they're not really familiar with the voting process and not being educated enough in how to vote, whether by absentee, in person, or early, then that's going to get even lower. But with increased education, that can be a lot higher. So rights about voter accessibility include being able to register to vote, having rights to handicap parking is a big one when you're doing it in person. Physical access is also very a big issue when trying to vote in person, and it's a right that people with disabilities have under the ADA. Alternative marking devices are really important for all people with disabilities, and especially with like low vision and blind people, like they need to have some kind of screen reader. A lot of the complaints about voting included, probably the most damning ones were was kind of like people not really getting their marking device attached to the voting station. So that was one thing that I had to resolve after 2018. Having privacy and independence when voting is exactly and explicitly what people with disabilities have under the Help America Vote Act in 2002. That has not changed, and this has been like a really big win for people with disabilities during that time, because now they no longer have to use punch cards. They can just go into any kind of machine that they want to, given that it hopefully works, and they can basically mark their ballot that way. Absentee ballots are also a very good way of voting. I don't want to demonize a vote by mail, because It's actually a very effective tool, and the only reason why it's kind of like not really supported is because it's getting slowed down somehow. So that's something that's been an issue because of, you know, some current political hot potato that is happening currently in this country right now. So if you don't want to deal with that though, then the best way to put an absentee ballot is under a drop box. And another right is getting help from others, from other people. Sometimes that could be a family member. And really the best way to get help from others is through a Democratic and Republican precinct delegate, one of each, so that they can help you with the ballot. The only thing that is not really acceptable is some kind of like union rep or an employer. So those are the only two that are not accepted. So for resources, the U.S. Department of Justice has some guides for voting right here. They're usually the slowest, however, when responding to disability voting complaints. The American Association of People with Disabilities Voter Resource Center is a really good tool. I would highly recommend it. It provides a lot of resources within like different states, and also like within their own voting systems, and then basically where your polling place is, how you can find stuff, what are the access, like accessibility rights. So that's kind of like a great resource. And then the election protection hotline is really good for immediately responding to having voter rights denied. And that's their website here, but I'm going to give you their phone number. Their phone number is 1-866-687-8683, otherwise known as 1-866-OUR-VOTE. And that provides the most immediate services to those who have trouble voting or have been denied the right to vote. So we want to hear from you if you experience any kind of voter intimidation, if any kind of like polling location is not accessible for whatever reason, if your voting rights have been denied, and if your technology is not acceptable. So after you contact 1-866-OUR-VOTE, such as like the election protection hotline, you can contact the intake and referral team, and they should be able to give you a case, and then it'll be transferred to my desk. And the really bigger message that we want to get is that your vote is your voice. And right in the very center, it says disability issues matter, I vote. It can also be that homelessness issues matter, I vote. And this is basically our phone number at the very top right here. It's 1-800-288-5923. That's for like the main office number. Our location is in 4095 Legacy Parkway in Lansing, Michigan, 48911. Kind of like bordering between the south side of Lansing and Holt. And then there's also a Marquette phone number. We have a smaller office in Marquette with only 2 people, but their phone number is 906-228-5910, and the rest are kind of like for a voice or if you're deaf or hard of hearing. And the bottom is where our website is right here, called www.drmich.org. And that'll be it.
Thank you so much, Noah. I really appreciate you sharing that information with us. I'm going to take back the screen. But I just want to acknowledge that so much of those resources, so much of the information that you shared with us is crucial for us to think about because, as you mentioned, there is a huge intersect between individuals with disabilities and those who have experienced homelessness or are currently experiencing homelessness. We know back in 2018, according to the most recent report from the Campaign to End Homelessness, that 44% of all individuals experiencing literal homelessness also had a disability of a long duration. So when we're talking about challenges for registration and casting your ballot, we know that there's multiple barriers that the folks that we're working with and the folks that we're trying to empower are experiencing. And having a disability on top of experiencing homelessness just creates new challenges. And so I'm so grateful, Noah, that you were able to share with us kind of some of the information you know about how we can make accommodations, resources that are available, and things we should just be thinking about as we're trying to set up programs or processes or events or practices, anything that helps empower the folks who are serving right now and trying to get them involved in the electoral process. So thank you so much for sharing that. And this presentation that Noah shared will also be available in the follow-up email that I send out. So next we are joined by Dwayne Cole with the Ruth Ellis Center. And Dwayne, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and unmute yourself. And I don't believe you have any visuals to share with us, but we're really excited to hear from you about your experience with voter registration and education at the Ruth Ellis Center. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurel. My name is Dwayne Cole. I'm the drop-in center manager here at the Ruth Ellis Center. And our mission is actually to create opportunities with LGBTQ young people to build their vision for a positive future. So for myself, I'm 22 years old. So my first time voting was actually like a few years ago. And I know for myself, I've had issues with education around voting. And then here at Ruth Ellis Center, we've had a few discussion groups. I've held a couple groups with the Youth Advisory Board, and we just sat down and really talked about voting and why some people may be hesitant to vote. And during those conversations, we actually talked about a lot of different experiences. Uh, we talked about how the different intersectionalities of one's identity actually plays a part in it too. You really have to think about the environment that people were raised in, and then you have to think about education around it. Because I know for myself growing up, I would say that school kind of gave a brief overview about the importance of elections and voting and different political necessities, but I feel like it really didn't give me that hands-on approach that I needed. And then through conversations that I've had with other people, it seemed as if like that was an expectation that maybe your parents would illustrate that or showcase the importance of voting. And for myself, it was kind of hard because during that time, a little background about myself is I went through the Ruth Ellis Center's leadership pipeline. So I started off as a young person coming to the space. So during that time, a few years ago, like around when I was in high school, I would say we never really talked much about voting. It was kind of just something that I knew that adults did, but I never really knew the importance of it. And I didn't really know how every level of elections like had uh every level just had like some type of value or some importance that really led to the bigger picture of our entire country. So for myself, that expectation I felt was supposed was assumed to come from my parents, but at the same time, when you think about this system of like continued, I would say, when you think about a system of political jargon or expectations, it's harder for someone experiencing homelessness. It's harder for someone who has seen a system where they don't feel supported. especially in the LGBTQ community, I feel as if there has not been much talk about how can we support the LGBTQ community. And I feel like that's something that could lead to distrust for like an entire population. And that's something that we talked about during our meetings and discussions about voter registration and if people were ready to vote. So the Youth Advisory Board, we talked about it, and that was really just the biggest thing. It's like, why? The question was, why should I vote for or in a system that seems to not have my best interest at heart, where it seems as if I don't know what I'm voting for. It's like picking the worst of less evils. And I feel like this year there's like a lot of different options for people to explore when it comes to voting. So I think that this year the turnout for voting is going to be way different. So for myself, I know because I'm still in the process of learning more and more every day about voting and the importance of it. But I also want to go on this journey with like my peers and the people that I live with, like my friends and my family, because it has been hard to really like find out how does politics work? Like, how are we supposed to look at different policies and procedures? How are we supposed to know who is responsible for what goes on in our community? So through that work, we as organization, we have like our drop-in center. So due to COVID, we aren't as active as we used to, but we had pop-up drop-in events where we allow for youth to come into the space, and then they can meet with a case manager to help them with voter registration and help them with answering all those questions that they may not know the answer to, especially when it comes to if I don't have my ID, if I don't know what address like to use. Like actually this is actually information that I actually just recently learned too this year, because I know like during my first time voting in the presidential election, I thought like it was mandatory, like you needed to have an ID. I thought that you you had to have a place to stay or else you wouldn't be able to vote. And a lot of this information I didn't know at the time, but I know now. And then I feel like it's really important to like share that information with anyone who doesn't know. So during that, or because of that, we actually held discussion groups. We've had voter registration events. And then actually we discussed in our youth advisory board meeting that it's important for the next generation to actually know uh, how do you suggest like new laws, or how do you really like review different policies, and who do you talk to regarding changing those policies. I feel like politics is a really really big system, and it's hard to kind of just explain in one, like you can't just explain that in one workshop. It's something that takes time. It's something that really takes a community, and it takes a group of dedicated people to really help support in access to that education. So every tip, every form of education, every way of support, like even if it's just like helping someone with printing out a form, like letting them know about voter registration forms, letting them know about affidavits as a resource, letting them know about voting by mail. A lot of these different options actually support in motivating and uplifting someone to actually vote. Because for the LGBTQ community, I've also talked to the youth advisory board, and we discussed how sometimes going to polling stations can be a bit nerve-wracking at times for someone that identifies as trans, really thinking about going to the polling booth and really not seeing the options to identify in the way that they feel comfortable with identifying. So it's kind of just like having to endure these little things that people may not think much about, and really just doing what you have to do for a community, or doing what you have to do for a country that may make you feel at times as if you're not supported. Um, and while it's super important, these are the real conversations that we've had just about like the barriers that our community has faced. So what we're doing now is really just trying to hold these groups and have these conversations and really break down these barriers, and then really trying to think of new innovative ways to educate people and ways to rebuild that trust. And I feel like that really does start off with education. It starts off with those workshops. It starts off with supporting people when you can. It starts off with really just giving people, especially LGBTQ youth, the opportunity to know that the education is out there. Because I do want to point out that for myself and for a lot of other LGBTQ youth that I've came in contact with, if you're experiencing homelessness and it's the expectation for you to get this education around voter registration and politics and different things like that. Imagine being a young person that may have experienced being kicked out of the house at the age of around 14 or in your teens, and then it's still expected for you to have all this knowledge and know that it's important to vote. Um, just as Laurel said in a previous slide, um, it's you kind of put that on the back burner. When you really think about politics, when you're thinking about survival, survival is really your focus. So I think that it's really important that in those opportunities or those situations where someone may not know something about voter registration or may not be interested in voting, I always urge people to go deeper instead of really demonizing someone and kind of saying, oh, well, it's important, why would you not do it? I think it's really important to go deeper and ask questions as to why wouldn't you? And then once you go deeper, you really tend to realize that it's just a matter of misinformation or not, or someone not being knowledgeable about the processes and what's actually available to them. Um, that has definitely been something that we've seen a lot. Um, so yeah, just in turn, I feel like that is my experience, and then like the experiences of a lot of the young people that we've talked to. But in the meantime, like we have really seen a change in people's interest in politics, as well as just people's enthusiasm about getting uh into politics just more, and like voting. Like I feel like not even just the general election. I feel like this is something that is it's gonna be it's gonna be really different, definitely to say the least. But I feel like it's gonna have a really good impact for our future. Just thinking about the discussions that I've had recently, like in our organization, as well as just what we have planned for the community. Um, but yeah, I know that was a bit uh, rambly, but I just feel like it's really important that we support everyone, like we support no matter no matter the education around it. And I think it's really important to just try to find new and innovative ways to support anyone that needs information around voter registration. So getting out there and really just like emphasizing its importance, as well as letting everyone know that this is not the only election that's important. All elections are important because they all are connected, actually. Um, but yeah.
Dwayne, that was perfect. Thank you. I really appreciate you talking through your experience, sharing your personal story and your personal journey with voting, and kind of uplifting all of the different lessons you've learned and all of the different stories that you've heard with the work that you're doing at the Ruth Ellis Center. I didn't want to cut you off, but I wanted to just say thank you for everything that you shared with us and for the work that you're doing there to empower youth and specifically LGBTQ youth who, as you've rightfully pointed out, do experience additional barriers and additional concerns when it comes to voting and to even registering to vote. So thank you for that.
Of course, of course.
And I want to just reflect. We did schedule this webinar for another half hour, but I know that without one of our presenters, we are going to wrap up early. So I'm going to shoot for getting you out of here at 1 o'clock instead of 1:30. I'm sure all of you can find ways to spend that extra 30 minutes. But I just want to spend a second reflecting on some of the things I heard from Noah and from Dwayne and some of the stuff that I presented early on, which is that as we are working on empowering individuals, regardless of who they are, where they are in their life, and what experiences they have had, we need to make sure that we are having these conversations on a regular basis. We are educating on a regular basis. As Dwayne said, and as someone in our comments mentioned, these are not things that are being taught consistently and regularly in our education system necessarily. And so it's up to us as advocates, it's up to us as people on the front lines, whether you are working with a service provider or are organizing get out the vote activities in your community, or anything that has you interacting with the public or with individuals in your community. It's up to us to take the time to have these conversations and to empower and have those deeper conversations, as Dwayne said, rather than the surface level, well, you should vote because you just should. And so I encourage everyone to start thinking about how you can incorporate those conversations into your daily routine, how you can start having those conversations with people who may be on the fence about voting this year or not, and how you can utilize the resources that you have at your disposal to help them through the process of registering to vote and then voting either early through the mail-in ballot option, or voting early at their local clerk's office, or voting on election day. And that brings me to my second reflection, which is, with all of the challenges that we've heard about today, with all of the education that needs to happen and that we need to be doing on a regular basis, I think the thing that pops out to me the most is that we all need to have a plan. And that's for each one of us individually as we vote and as we help to empower others to be able to vote. Come up with your plan and stick to it so that you are voting this year and you have plans to be able to vote in the future. A lot of information is out there, and I'm sure if you're like me, you're getting a ton of communications right now about the election. One thing that may cut through the noise for you is if you have questions, if you need help, either for yourself or someone who you are working with, I recommend that you reach out to your local clerk. They are someone who should have the resources and the time to walk you through the process, to assist you, and to answer any questions that you have. Clerk's information is found on the Department of State website. I believe the link that I shared in my presentation early on should take you to a list of clerk's offices and how to contact them. Please utilize that resource and any other resources that you think are appropriate as you think about how you can help with voter registration and education. I have not seen any questions come in, a couple comments, which I appreciate, and I will be following up personally with those who have been commenting. But it is 1 o'clock, but still want to just acknowledge that we have a little bit of time. If anybody has a question, please feel free to send it in. If we don't answer it live on this webinar, we will answer it offline. Or you can also email me. My information is on the screen. I've also included the information for two fantastic interns who we've had the pleasure of working with this semester, Haley and Kate, who are also available to talk through any voter registration or education questions that you have. So we are available and always happy to talk with you about these issues. We also have another webinar scheduled for the 15th, so just a couple days away, where we will be talking about last efforts to get out the vote and talking through how you, again, can be working on the election this year and encouraging folks to actually participate in registering and casting their vote. So I will be sending out the information about how to register for that webinar and our follow-up, but I encourage you to hold that time. It is October 15th, which I believe is a Thursday, from 12 to 1 o'clock, and it is about get out the vote. And let me just check here. Yes, so I did have a question for the speaker who couldn't make it to forward slides or website info. Absolutely, I will be reaching out to Troy and his organizations, Nation Outside and Safe and Just Michigan, to see if we can get that information, and I would be very happy to share that with you. Thank you for that question and that request. Not seeing any other questions. Oh, nope, I spoke too soon. Okay. Thank you for everyone who attended, everyone who sent in comments. I appreciate everyone sticking with us And for participating, again, this webinar has been recorded and I will be sending it out. And I will be sending the request that all of you share that with your networks, so this information is reaching out to your communities and that people have the resources they need to feel as though they can participate in helping others register to vote and vote this election year and every year. Because as we've learned from our presenters, this is a conversation we need to be having all the time if we're going to overcome all the barriers that the folks that we're serving are encountering, and also taking advantage of all the opportunities that we have to participate. So thank you, everyone. It's a little bit after 1 o'clock. I'll give you back 27 minutes of your day. I hope you all have a wonderful day. I hope you're all staying safe, and we'll see you next week for our next election 2020 webinar. And thank you to our presenters as well. Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.